All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today we have a sponsored stream. A major shout out goes to Logos Cinema. Logos Cinema, for those of you guys who don't know, it is a project that many of you Orthodox Christians out there might want to become more aware of and be a part of. So I am actually part of today's stream is an announcement in which I have partnered with Logos Cinema, and it is a streaming platform for Orthodox Christian content. And they have tons of stuff over there. And let me just show you a little bit of what I'm talking about. And I have a special link for anyone in the chat who would like to become a member over at Logos Cinema. And this is right here, logoscinema.com/Codal. And they have awesome stuff of unique original content, Orthodox documentaries from all around the world, not just some of the more recent ones like Sacred Alaska, American Orthodox. Shout out to my friend John Hammond. But all types of stuff. And you can see that I am one of the new members of content creation over on Logos Cinema. So I want to highly encourage anyone who wants to contribute to a platform that is putting out unique, original Orthodox content to go and sign up today. Use the link that I just posted in right here in the live chat. And so, how does this connect with the hero's journey? Well, let me explain. So today we're going to be diving into something that probably many of you guys have already heard about. And then this is Joseph Campbell's theory regarding the hero's journey, an archetypal structure in which basically all myths and stories resemble this continuing pattern of someone who goes on an adventure, transgresses into the underworld, gains new skills. For Campbell, undergoes an egoic death, becomes transformed, and then brings back the boon, their gifts to the world to transform both the community and the world society itself. So we're going to be breaking down and actually critiquing really the philosophy behind the hero's journey. And that's why I titled today's stream the hidden religion of the hero's journey. Why do I say a hidden religion? Well, there is a sort of perennial spirituality, a hidden religion behind the articulation of many people who promote this idea of the hero's journey, these archetypal structures. And it's very much rooted in Jungian psychology, which we're going to touch on today. And also, it's rooted in many of the really 18th century forward philosophical movements, such as German Romanticism, American Pragmatism, of course, Freud and Jung, in East Asian mysticisms, specifically Advaita Vedanta of Hinduism. Advaita Vedanta is the non-dualism of Hinduism. It's a unique school, and it's very popular in the West. And so Joseph Campbell, though he does, in fact, articulate a true pattern. Part of today's stream is to say that the hero's journey is true. It is real. There is these sort of archetypal structures that we can find in narratives, whether it be the hero's journey or the father archetype or the mother archetype or the evil villain. However, the philosophy behind Campbell's hero's journey, and that which has been so popular in Hollywood and film creation ever since, is really the spiritual worldview of the West, a sort of relativism. It's a psychologizing of religion. It's not, as I'm going to argue today, the true hidden religion behind the hero's journey, which is Logos theology. It's Christ, it's orthodoxy. And so this is why Logos Cinema wanted to do a sponsored stream specifically on the hero's journey, because this is what they're focusing on, is sort of redeeming, sanctifying the hero's journey, not so it's just Pixar movies or Star Wars, Neo, Harry Potter, Frodo Baggins of the Lord of the Rings, although I do like the Lord of the Rings, King Arthur, Odysseus, Hercules, Beowulf. All these great heroic figures sort of resemble the same archetypal structure. But what Logos Cinema is trying to do is create original content specifically for Orthodox Christians, but also available to a wider audience. You don't have to be Orthodox. And so they have many film projects. They have documentaries that they're already working on regarding the lives of various Orthodox saints and things such as horror movies. But in light of spiritual warfare inside the Orthodox context. And so these are ways in which Orthodoxy can essentially be ingratiated to a non-Orthodox audience and learn about Orthodox theology in an entertainment and artistic way. So I think their project is fantastic. am friends with both Andrew and Zach, who are behind Logos Cinema, and I'm excited for what it is that they're trying to build. So we're going to, again, introduce the hero's journey, talk a little bit about it, highlight that it is true. You know, to give Joseph Campbell credit, it is a real pattern. The problem is he can't explain why these archetypes exist. And if you were to ask Joseph Campbell, why is it that these archetypes and myths and stories and poetry and art, why are they there? He would say, well, it has to do with Jungian psychology. It has to do with these inherited structures of the unconscious. But that doesn't actually answer the question. All that does is redefine the phenomenon. Because then you could ask, okay, well, where do these inherited structures come from? What's the ultimate reason for them? What's the point? And it just goes in this endless loop of psychologizing. It's all about the psychology. And so I have 6 specific Orthodox criticisms to lay out why orthodoxy and logos theology is the true hero's journey, why it's more comprehensive and coherent than anything that Joseph Campbell would articulate. And I initially wanted to play videos of Joseph Campbell in today's stream. But like Alan Watts, his stuff is highly, highly copyrighted. And so I checked before we even went live today, and there is no chance that I will be able to play anything of Joseph Campbell except one video I found on X, because it's in a vertical format and it shouldn't get picked up. Maybe the audio, but it's only about a minute and so long. So this is essentially what we're going to get into. And if you're not familiar with the hero's journey, there's many steps to it, depending on when you talk to Joseph Campbell or other people who articulate it. It can be 10 steps, 12 steps, 36 steps. I went ahead and just broke it down into 12 steps. And those are the ordinary world, that the hero living in an ordinary life in a normal world begins to encounter this call to adventure. This is step 2. And the hero is invited into a journey of transformation into the unknown, usually. And often he's very reluctant. That's step 3, is a refusal to the adventure. Again, think of Harry Potter, think of Lord of the Rings, think of Neo, right? When the people come to Neo's door in the Matrix and he's told to follow the white rabbit, he's reluctant at first. He's reluctant to go on this journey. But then step 4, they meet the mentor. And the mentor is all about introducing them to the idea that they need to cross the threshold into the underworld or the unknown. And the mentor essentially prepares the hero to begin this journey. And then they begin to face trials, enemies. They gain allies, friends. Again, think of Lord of the Rings and everybody that's there to help Frodo Baggins as he goes to destroy the ring. And then the descent into darkness. And this is the deepest part of the hero's journey, essentially. This is the part in which he faces death, tribulation, and there's a genuine transformation of their identity into something new. Now, Joseph Campbell psychologizes all of this. He equates this to some types of transformation of the unconscious or the conscious mind. And this is part of the problem with the ways in which the hero's journey is articulated today. This leads then to the supreme ordeal, the ultimate battle, the climax of every narrative, every hero's journey, in which skills that they gain during this transformative process to the underworld are then tested by the enemy. They are forced to defeat evil, or whatever narrative or story presents as evil. And then there's the transformation and the resurrection. Fear is overcome. Evil is defeated. And the ultimate boon, as Joseph Campbell would often call it, and where I'm getting all this stuff is from his most famous book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. I spent about a day and a half just going through the book, and I was going to read sections of it to you guys, but it's not necessary. So we're going to go a different direction. But the boon, as Joseph Campbell calls it, essentially is the gift. Could be the elixir of immortality, could be the golden chalice, could be any item in which this gift is brought back to the world to transform, heal, and liberate the people that he is then returning back to. So step 10 is the return journey. Every hero's journey has this narrative structure where the transformation is leading back to the hero into ordinary life, into the world in which he initially left and was reluctant to leave. And of course, the hero then is typically reluctant to leave the underworld or the transcendent world, or the place in which he experienced this transformation and defeated evil. And then that moves into the integration, which is the whole point. Again, for Campbell, he's taking Jungian psychology and reappropriating it to say this is about, psychological integration of the animus and the anima, all these different things. And eventually they return the gift to the community. And those are essentially my 12 steps of the hero's journey. So Jungian psychology is very much Jung's road into the unconscious, had to do with his experience of alchemy. And it was the alchemical process that we've talked about post-Renaissance. And really, it's the perennial spirituality and philosophy first established during the Renaissance. Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, all these different individuals that were interested in Christian Kabbalah and a sort of new interpretation of Christ as some type of ultimate hero. And for Campbell, Christ is only a symbolic hero. He is one of many. And this is going to be one of my criticisms, because Campbell's hero's journey really falls apart under an ontological scrutiny and epistemological scrutiny. And there is the philosophy behind it really has no there. And that's part of the problem with contemporary Western society. But Campbell is really just indicative of the 20th century himself. And so Jung's analysis of alchemy has to do with this transformative process, right? The sublimation, the transmutation, in which they looked at matter, and from the observation of matter, they were projecting psychological structures. This is kind of the key to understanding what was really going on with alchemy and these hermaphrodites and these weird pictorial artistic depictions in alchemical texts of the opposites, right? The unification of opposites, because it really was a sort of Neoplatonic move. And that's what Campbell is doing. His Advaita Vedanta is a non-dualism. It's a privileging of unity over multiplicity. And in fact, his entire corpus, his entire work is this perennial argument that all paths lead to the same mountaintop. But how can that be the case when the metaphysics of all these different traditions and the doctrines and the worldviews are so different? One has to be more true than the other. And so there's this underpinning relativism in Campbell's work. And so we're going to break all that stuff down, but we have to realize that this secular spirituality, this perennialism, is really the sort of default spirituality of the Western world today. And I am not here to debunk the hero's journey. In fact, I think the hero's journey is true. But the problem is, why does the hero journey exist? And for Campbell, for Jung, for Freud, for Feuerbach, it has to do with, again, man creating God. For Freud, for example, Freud believed that really all religion was a projection of neurosis, of, the residue of your day-to-day life or your repressed sexual desires. And so religion, even though Freud was Jewish and he never once denied his Jewish identity. In fact, I have a quote of him claiming that even though I deny religion and I may not practice it the way that my peers do, I am a Jew through and through. He believed all religion was some type of neurotic projection onto the world. Now, Jung, much more sympathetic to religion and looking at these underlying mythical structures and symbolism and stuff like that, he takes an alchemical and a Gnostic bent. But the problem with both of these, whether it be Freud or Jung or Campbell, is that it's totally psychologized. And therefore, there is this regressive loop, because for us, for us Orthodox Christians looking at their argument, there is no real transcendence. God is being made in the image of man. But we as Orthodox Christians believe that man is made in the image of God. And so to understand the ontology of man, we first have to deal with God and an understanding of God. So it deals with revelation. Well, Campbell rejects revelation. He thinks mythology is revelation. And he even argues that Christ as a historical person is really secondary, because he privileges this idea of symbolic truth above all truth. And therefore, there is really no attempt to point towards an ultimate transcendence. And because of his Advaita Vedanta, this Neoplatonic privileging of unity, he ignores all the differences between traditions. He argues, and I'll show you guys a video here, he argues that essentially Buddha and Christ are the exact same thing. They have the same message, even though Buddhism is denying the existence of a soul. They're denying the existence of personhood. They're claiming that the world itself is illusory, that it's not really real. And therefore, the whole point of life is about detachment. Well, how can you square Buddha's understanding of the anatman, the lack of a soul, the Maya of the world, that the reality itself is an illusion, to something like Christ, where we believe in objective reality. We believe in not in an eternal creation, as Eastern mysticism, be it all the Vedic traditions, especially Hinduism and Buddhism. The universe, creation is eternal. It never has a beginning or end. It may go through Kali Yugas, different cycles, but it's eternal. It's always going to be there. Well, how can you square all these different worldviews as all pointing to the same mountaintop, which is a metaphor that Campbell used over and over again? And here, I'll play just an example. This is the only video I'll be able to play of Joseph Campbell because, as I said, the Joseph Campbell Society is incredibly strict on copyright. So I was going to play videos of him with Bill Moyers, who is also a news correspondent with PBS, and themselves progressive. And so when you hear Campbell, realize what you're listening to is a progressive understanding of what religion is. And really, Campbell isn't unique. And what I'm going to show you guys today is what he is doing is synthesizing much of the 18th, 19th, and 20th century ideology post-Enlightenment. And he may not go to the realm of pure rationalism, but he certainly appeals to the German Romantics. And the German Romantics, what is going on with my camera? Am I lagging right now? Okay. The German Romantics were all about aesthetics, about emotions, about feelings, and the way things appear. Well, that's very different than Orthodoxy, understanding actually a true metaphysics. So I'm going to be articulating why logos theology, why the logi, the divine principles, the true archetypes of creation actually have a deeper explanation. Campbell basically describes, and I use the metaphor of like Plato's cave. If you're familiar with Plato's cave, he's talking about men who are appearing shadows on the wall, but they don't really understand where the light comes from. This is very much what Jung and Campbell do. They watch the patterns, the shadows, but they have no explanation of why the shadows exist. Just because Jung claims that they're inherited psychological structures doesn't explain why they exist again. And if man is creating God, and if man is creating meaning, well, then we can come up with new forms of meaning. We don't discover meaning, we create meaning. And that is a totally different paradigm than the Orthodox worldview. So here is Joseph Campbell, and you can get a little bit of a taste of his worldview here, describing the relationship between Christ and the Buddha, despite, as I said, their metaphysics, their doctrines, their belief on creation, on the soul, all of this stuff being absolutely antithesis to each other.
The kingdom of the Father is spread upon the earth, and men do not see it.
And so if you don't know, what he's doing right now is quoting the Gospel of Thomas, because one of Campbell's claims is that the four canonical Gospels in Scripture are contradictory, he claims. And he elevates the Gospel of Thomas as like the ultimate exegetical text of what Christianity's heart truly is. And so he's quoting aspects in this lecture. I watched parts of the full thing. He's talking about the Gospel of Thomas and how profound the Gospel of Thomas is, and why Gnosticism gets deeper to the heart of Christianity than what he would consider the canonical scriptures.
Totally different reading of the end of the world. When you have seen the radiance of eternity through all the forms of time, and it's a function of art to make that visible to you, then you have really ended life in the world as it is lived by those who think only in the historical concretizing terms. This is a function of mythology. That's a mythological reading of what was otherwise a theological statement. The Christ idea and the Buddha idea are perfectly equivalent mythological symbols. Two ways of saying the same thing, that a transcendent energy consciousness informs the whole world and informs you.
But you see, the movie just there is just said that Christ is talking about consciousness. Well, he's not talking about consciousness only in some of these Gnostic texts, and not even all the Gnostic texts, because all these Gnostic schools were competing with each other. So you see, Campbell's explanation of mythology is already rooted in him picking and choosing what he wants to look at in regards to the variety of religious experience and mythology. Because Orthodox Christianity or any sort of traditional Christian church does not believe that Christ is talking about Christ consciousness. They're talking about the actual incarnation of God. And he says they're exactly the same mythological figure. Well, their messages are different. Maybe the only, and someone said it here in the chat, maybe their only similarity is it has to do with a checking of one's ego and humility, but their prescription for that is totally different. And I've talked about before an American woman who became a Buddhist monk, and one of the things that she had to do was renounce her children. And we talked a little bit about this really depersonhood in Buddhism is a lack of person, because they claim that your ego and your idea of self is totally illusionary. Well, Christianity is saying, no, it's actually really important. The choices you make now, your ethical decisions, your morality, these things are going to dictate your judgment, and that your personhood is something that is a unique insubstantiation. It's not an illusion. It's not something to do away with. Okay. So anyways, that's the only bit of Joseph Campbell we're going to be able to get into today. But some of the other videos, we're going to watch this one. It's a good little overview on the hero's journey and uses a lot of film clips, which I'm not going to play any films because they immediately get copyrighted. But it seems like this video here I'll be able to play. And if we want, we can get into Jordan Peterson's Hero's Journey and Carl Jung's psychoanalysis. But one of the things that I'm going to do here in just a few that I've never seen anybody do regarding Joseph Campbell is I put together what I perceive as the full breakdown on his intellectual influences. And so all these Wikipedia tabs are my attempt to go through, based on my experience with philosophy and the history of ideas, to see what I read in A Hero with a Thousand Faces, where he's pulling this stuff on, because Campbell is really just a synthesizer. A lot of his ideas aren't really unique to him. They're a reiteration of all these other important thinkers throughout history. Again, as I said, all of which are 18th century forward. It's really a very modernist interpretation, a world in which God has died. He quotes Nietzsche all the time. And therefore, man must make himself, through the transformation of consciousness and the dissolution of his ego, into something greater, the hero. And that's what it is all about from his perspective. So smash that like, guys. We have tons to get into today. And as I said, a major thank you to the Logos Cinema crew for sponsoring today's stream. And if you... and I highly encourage you to go sign up to the Logos Cinema. They have tons of great content. Use this link right here so you can know that you're part of the Codal crew, and they can track everyone who is coming from this stream to the Logos Cinema. As I said, they have tons and tons of great content. You can go through here and you can see, you can just begin to move through tons of unique stuff that many of you guys probably have never seen before. So also, I do want to say, if anybody is interested in joining our men's community over at the Logos Academy, please do so. Let me pull it up real quick. We would love to have you. We meet every single Tuesday evening, and you can join with this link right here. We have tons of exclusive content on there. We're doing meetings every single Tuesday. Right now we're working through the Book of Enoch, as well as I'm putting together a course on how to think clearly, how to think like a philosopher. So if that's something you'd be interested in, if you are a man and you have male genitalia and do not identify as a woman, you are more than welcome to join the Logos Academy in our community. And also, if you have not gotten the best Christian deconstruction on transhumanism that exists, please do so with this link right here. And in fact, something that I'm really excited about is Logos Cinema and I are partnering where we're going to try to animate the return to Babylon from Adam to Antichrist and turn it into essentially a documentary series. So this is the cool stuff that Logos Cinema is doing, and what they have the capability to do is actually take work from Orthodox content creators and scholars and turn them into essentially motion pictures, documentaries, films. And so one of the projects that I'm really excited to work with them on is a film project related to my book, Return to Babylon from Adam to Antichrist. So if you'd like to get author signed copies, please use the link that I just posted. Or if you'd like to get a little cheaper version, you can go ahead and use Amazon as well. And if you too would like to sponsor a stream, you can sponsor a stream with this link right here on any topic that you would like for me to cover. See, Darth Grumpy Dad, he's a Logos Academy member. And he says, it's a good time every Tuesday. Absolutely. We have literally a fantastic group of men over at the Logos Academy. And thank you so much. Josiah Elleron says it's a fantastic book. Well, thank you, brother. I really appreciate that. And so if you would be interested, use the link that I just posted, or if you'd be interested in hopping into a one-on-one session to talk about whatever your heart desires, you can do so with that link right there. Don't forget that you can use promo code COTEL, C-O-T-E-L, and get access to some of the best peptides on the market. Very high quality. I can assure you that's one of the reasons they're a little bit more expensive, but fantastic peptides. Or if you're in the market for any Orthodox items, use promo code COTEL, and you can get access to a discount on incense, prayer ropes, study Bibles, icons, anything over at orthodoxdepot.com. It's another great way to help my work out as well. So let me catch up with the chat real quick. Jonanon throws in 10. Thank you so much, brother. He says, thanks for shining the light on the American Orthodox film and Voice in the Wilderness. Reflections on the life and legacy of Father Seraphim Rose. Looking forward to your collab with Logos Cinema. Absolutely. So John Anon, for those of you who don't know, is John Hammond. All those great books that I've covered in previous streams, he is the person behind American Orthodox, the great documentary, if you guys haven't seen it. And if you haven't, go join Logos Cinema, and you'll get access to that, Sacred Alaska, and tons of other great films. So really appreciative of all the support John Hammond has shown me. I appreciate his friendship. Thank you so much, John. Again, and thanks for all the work that you're doing for the Orthodox community. Cool Dude throws in 5. Says, we'll check out Logos Cinema. Would rather send an Orthodox company money over the wicked fiends of Amazon, Disney, Netflix. Absolutely. And it's more than just Netflix, because it's going to be partnering with people like myself to actually put together film projects regarding our own content. So there's so much that they have in store, as well as John Hammond said, a documentary on the life and legacy of Father Seraphim Rose. So incredible stuff coming out. Support them, because all that money is going back into their original projects. So if you want more Orthodox films, you want more Orthodox documentaries, support the guys at Logos Cinema. Josiah Elleron, Codal Crew member for 23 months. Thank you so much, brother. He says, like the stream and support DPH. That's right, guys. Appreciate that support, Josiah. And he throws in a $10 super chat. Says, there was a way that in the 90s and early 2000s, men like Father Richard Rohr were really holding up Joseph Campbell, but not from a Christian perspective. It was very Gnostic and New Age. Yeah, well, that's part of what we're going to be covering today, is that tends to be a general pattern that people see. Let me check Streamlabs real quick, make sure I don't miss anybody before we begin to dive deeper into the stream. Okay. So I have, like I said, 6 points in which I want to critique um, Joseph Campbell. And I'm going to do that after you guys get introduced to the hero's journey here. We're going to play a video of the hero's journey. And then I'll get into a true critique of all this stuff and why it actually comes up short, even though the pattern, the description, the reflections of these patterns is true. Because if you're familiar with some of my previous streams, we've talked about logos and logi. Those are the archetypes. They're all rooted in the eternal logos, that is Jesus Christ. But St. Justin Martyr has a great understanding of logos spermatikos, and I highly recommend you guys reading that in some of his apologies. Is logos spermatikos is the idea that seeds of logos can be found all over the place, because one of the central problems with Joseph Campbell is there is no unified epistemology. How can he claim that, you know, the Buddha or Christ or Odysseus or whatever, Neo from the Matrix, is all the same thing? Well, there's similarities for sure, but there's also significant differences that they tend to neglect. And this Neoplatonic, Advaita Vedantic interpretation of privileging unity over multiplicity. So once we introduce, and you guys can see the hero's journey here from a more holistic perspective, then I'm going to deconstruct it and explain to you guys why it's actually not as explanatory as it may appear. It definitely describes a pattern, but there is no explanation for why that pattern exists. So here we go.
Embedded deep in the human psyche lies the narrative of what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. This is more than just a mere mythological narrative. This is a deep truth that applies to every human story. This is a journey about self-discovery, living a fully realized life, or as Campbell would simply state, following your bliss. The hero's journey was his all-embracing metaphor for the deep inner journey of transformation that heroes in every time and place seem to share, a path that leads them through great movements of separation, descent, ordeal, and return. It is going full circle from the ordinary world to the special world and back again. This same narrative spans across all cultures, eras, religions, and tales, including not only your favorite stories like Star Wars and Harry Potter, but within the lives of every human being on the planet. The journey stages may be avoided, repeated, or shifted depending upon the needs of the individual story. The hero's journey can be just as much as an inner voyage into the unconscious mind as it is an external adventure. There are a number of steps that a hero must go through for self-transformation. Typically, there are 12 steps that usually go in the following order. Step 1, the ordinary world. This is where we all start, in the ordinary world, where the hero is a lesser version of himself in the beginning, just like all of us. Most fall into the trap of society's doctrine and end up following the status quo like everybody else. We do what our family, friends, society tells us to do, which leads us into living a life that's not our own. But deep down, we know that there's more to life, that there's an exciting adventure waiting for us. In Star Wars, you see Luke Skywalker being bored to death as a farm boy before he tackles the universe, the special world, which is a metaphor for stepping into chaos, uncertainty, the unknown, or as Jung would call, the unconscious. Step 2, call to adventure. The call to adventure signifies that destiny has summoned the hero. As we go about our lives, we will encounter multiple calls to adventure, opportunities to embark on a new quest which will change everything we thought we knew about ourselves and reality. Typically, this will involve delving deep into our fears or the unknown. We will be faced with a difficult challenge to let go of what we know. It's up to us whether or not we accept that call. In the Matrix, the call to adventure is when Neo gets the message to follow the white rabbit. Sadly, most people don't get past this stage. They live their life according to others, never really chasing their dreams because they rather play it safe and stay in the illusion of certainty. This often leads them to feel unfulfilled and stagnant. They never accepted that call to adventure. Step 3, refusal of the call. The hero will almost always refuse the call, at least in the beginning, due to fears, insecurities, resistance, and the unwillingness to change. And this is totally understandable. I mean, it's scary facing our fears, right? In The Matrix, Morpheus calls Neo and tells him to cross the ledge, but Neo refuses and gets taken away by the agents. The hero's journey is just as much an inner voyage as an external adventure. Refusing the call to adventure in modern life many times refers to avoiding our issues, right? Our unconscious mind. This could be a fear that we haven't faced internally or an opportunity we didn't take because it's too risky. So we don't do anything and wonder what could have been. Step 4, meeting with the mentor. The hero encounters a mentor who gives them wisdom, insights, and guidance that will help them on their journey. In The Matrix, it was Morpheus who mentored Neo. In Star Wars, it was Obi-Wan Kenobi to Luke Skywalker. In Lord of the Rings, it was Gandalf to Frodo. Just remember that meeting a mentor doesn't necessarily have to happen physically, even though many times this does happen eventually as you progress through your hero's journey. People like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Elliot Holmes, Robert Greene, Aubrey Marcus, Carl Jung, and Jordan Peterson, just to name a few, have all been amazing mentors to me, even though I haven't met any of them in my life. Yet they have helped me tremendously on my journey with their experiences, wisdom, and valuable insights. Step 5, crossing the first threshold. This is when the hero goes from the ordinary world to the special world. This is a metaphor for going into the unconscious, into the unknown. This is where the adventure of self-discovery truly begins. This is also the point of no return. After the hero crosses the first threshold, life will never be the same. This is the stage where Neo takes the red pill and wakes up from the Matrix. Crossing the first threshold in your hero's journey may be receiving a piece of information that changes your perspective on life forever, or quitting your job and moving to another country. Step 6. Test allies, enemies. The hero learns the rules of the new world. Challenges, walls, conflicts arises. You meet new friends, have new experiences, but at the same time face more challenges. The most important function of this stage in this story is the testing of the hero to prepare them for the ordeals that lie ahead. This is when Morpheus teaches Neo the training simulation, or when Harry adjusts to life in Hogwarts. Step 7. Approach to the innermost cave. The innermost cave may represent many things in a hero's story, such as an actual location in which lies a terrible danger, or an inner conflict which up until now the hero hasn't faced yet. In many myths, the hero has to descend into hell to retrieve a loved one, or into a cave to fight a dragon and receive the treasure. The dragon in mythology represents everything you fear, which guards the most precious treasure. This is a metaphor for life. It's when you break through the other side of what you fear most that bears the biggest rewards and growth. But this isn't easy by any means. Like when the Oracle tells Neo that Morpheus or he will die, and that Neo has the power to choose who. Or when the Green Goblin asks Spider-Man to join him, but Peter refuses. It is at this stage in the hero's journey which the hero has to make a very tough decision. Step 8. The ordeal. This is usually the biggest challenge a hero must face, such as a deep inner crisis or hitting rock bottom. Only through the form of death can the hero be reborn, experiencing a metaphorical resurrection that somehow grants him greater power or insight necessary in order to fulfill his destiny. This is the high point of the hero's story, and where everything he holds dear is put on the line. If he fails, he will either die, or life as he knows it will never be the same again. Step 9. The reward. After triumphing the ordeal in the innermost cave, the hero receives a reward. Whether it's a physical object, knowledge, or even love, the true all-healing elixir is the achievement of inner change. Neo blames himself for Morpheus being captured, so he decides to re-enter the Matrix to save him. Or in The Lion King, when Mufasa's ghost tells Simba he must return to the Pride Lands. In everyday life, the reward could be settling a conflict with a family member, or the shadow self, or even healing a trauma, which gives you a much better understanding of yourself, allowing you to live a much happier and fulfilled life. Step 10. The road back. After the hero gains the reward, we move into Act 3. The hero isn't out of the woods just yet. This stage marks the decision to return to the ordinary world. The hero realizes that the special world must eventually be left behind, and there are still dangers, temptations, and tests ahead. Before Neo can leave the Matrix, Agent Smith kills him. Simba returns to the Pride Lands and faces Scar. If the hero has not resolved the issue with the conquered villain, in real life this refers to the shadow, it comes after him with a vengeance. In psychology, this refers to neurosis, bad habits, old addictions, and dark pasts coming back to haunt us, like an ex-girlfriend, for example, after we thought we were done with them forever. Step 11. Resurrection. During the resurrection, death and darkness are encountered one more time before being conquered for good. Danger is usually at the peak of the entire story, and the threat is to the entire world, not just the hero. The stakes are at their very highest. The hero uses all lessons learned on the journey and is transformed into a new being with new insights. This is my favorite part in The Matrix, when Trinity tells Neo that she loves him, so he must be the one. So then Neo revives and kills Agent Smith. This could represent an ego death, for example, which triggers an enlightening experience. Or it could be going to the darkest depths of our psyche during a hardcore depression, hitting rock bottom, extracting that wisdom and transcending it all with that fire in the belly, which makes us fearless, that helps push us forward on our self-development. This is a critical point in the hero's journey where he or she realizes that they had the power within them the whole time. Step 12, return with the elixir. Once the transformation is complete, the hero returns to the ordinary world with the elixir, a treasure or a new understanding. Returning with the elixir means the hero can now implement change in his daily life and use the lessons of the adventure to heal his wounds and help others in the ordinary world. This is important because unless something is brought back from the ordeal in the innermost cave, the hero is doomed to repeat the adventure until the lesson is learned, which many of us stay stuck in. It's like this painful karmic cycle that keeps hitting us time and time again, each time more painful than the last, until we finally learn our lesson. In life, the elixir can be a metaphor for growth, love, wisdom, freedom, or knowledge, which we can use to help others, even if it's just our close friends and family. The hero's journey isn't a linear path that you reach once and finish forever. It is a cyclic journey in personal transformation, where you constantly face challenges and resistance, i.e. the shadow, which helps you constantly grow and gain wisdom. But this isn't easy. Facing yourself is the most terrifying and challenging thing you will ever do in life. But it's the only way to truly transform in a meaningful, positive way, which will make a huge impact in others' lives. And this all starts with accepting that call to adventure, facing your fears, walking your path to self-discovery, and living your truth. So what are you waiting for?
Okay, so you guys get the idea, the hero's journey, and if you weren't already familiar with it. So now I want to break down and criticize and critique the explanation that Campbell provides for why the hero's journey exists. Because as I said, the philosophy behind it is essentially perennialism. And perennialism and the psychologizing of religion has a handful of problems with it. Number one is ontology. This is my first and most really devastating critique to it, is that Campbell confuses ontology with psychology. He thinks that archetypal structures of myth reflect the structure of being, archetypal structures reflect the nature of being, ontology, what's real, being itself, not the psyche. He thinks that it's all these unconscious or, the collective unconscious structures that we've inherited. And therefore, he misses that there must be some type of metaphysics. Their metaphysics, the Campbell, Jung, a lot of these people, the only thing that connects all of it is this understanding of a collective unconscious. But for us, it's the eternal logos in which all things were made. And that's why the logi, these archetypes, these divine principles of creation are first and foremost. For Campbell, it's psyche to myth. For us Orthodox Christians, it's logos to creation. From creation to human nature, made in the image of God, from human nature to myth. And that myth is essentially reflecting the ways in which being is experienced in the world. But that's a deeper philosophical understanding that Campbell can actually provide. And so he inverts participation. Christ is participating in Christ is participating in archetypes for Campbell. But where do the archetypes? As I said, they just redefined the problem based on Jungian psychology by arguing that these archetypes are just inherited structures, but they must be rooted in something metaphysical if they're found all across cultures, societies, mythologies. And so it inverts participation as opposed to archetypes participating in the logos, which is what the Orthodox understanding would be. They claim that it's Christ's participation in archetypes. And this is why it's so ahistorical, because Campbell actually negates the importance of the veracity of any of this stuff. And so Christ is just a symbol. He's not even historical. He thinks the debate on the historicity of Christ is really secondary and doesn't matter whether he existed or whether he did exist, which is ridiculous, because for us Christians, the resurrection, the incarnation of God, is a real thing. That's the only reason why archetypes exist. Archetypes are reflecting Christ. This is why they're found across cultures. Logos spermaticos, seeds of logos, are the things in which mythology shares, because archetypally they are rooted within the logi. That's the first and foremost. Number two is Campbell replaces history with mythology. As I said, he's not interested in history itself. And this is totally contrary to 1 Corinthians 15:17, in which St. Paul essentially says, if Christ didn't resurrect from the dead, then the faith doesn't matter and there's no salvation from our own sin. So he thinks that historical facts become secondary to symbolic meaning, something that many people have said. And in fact, in ways, Jordan Peterson has articulated in his biblical series that whether Christ is actually the Logos, whether he is God incarnate, isn't as important as the symbolic truth of speaking the world and putting order into existence. And so the resurrection matters to us because it's not a symbol. It's a historical reality because it actually occurred. Ontology precedes symbolism. This is philosophically very important. Ontology precedes symbolism. Symbolism must be rooted again in some metaphysic that they themselves don't have, because they're arguing all these metaphysical systems are somehow saying the same thing while ignoring all the differences and distinctions between. Number 3 is an epistemological critique. Campbell's universalism eliminates truth claims. You can't make universal truth claims in his perennial system. And I've said this over and again regarding New Age spirituality and these modern interpretations, is that essentially his perennialism argues that all paths are leading to the same mountaintop. But that can't be the case, because fundamentally they are absolutely antagonistic and in opposition to each other. And therefore, contradictory metaphysics cannot be equally true. And if you claim that they are equally true by ignoring these differences, you are promoting a form of relativistic truth. And if it's relativism, then how can Campbell go on and talk emphatically and poetically about all these different stories and myths as being true to the nature of your existence in your life? And I don't even deny that the hero's journey is true and that this is a symbolic pattern within all myths and stories. The problem is, the reason it's true is because it's reflecting Christ in creation. It's reflecting the cross in creation. That's what makes it true. So he ignores the fact that, Hinduism or Buddhism has an impersonal God. So which one is God personal? Because that's what Christianity is claiming. Or is it impersonal, like Eastern mysticism claims? Is creation temporal, as Christianity claims that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end? Or is it eternal, as Eastern mysticism would claim? Those are contradictory metaphysics that must be reconciled. He argues for reincarnation, but Scripture is clearly talking about resurrection of the personhood of the person themselves, that your soul is unique and it must be protected. And the choices you make in your moral and ethical life is very important to how then your judgment will the outcome of your judgment when you face the dread judgment seat of Christ. And so is it theosis, which means that I and my individual will is uniting through a willful love with Christ and being transformed in that process? Or is it dissolution into Brahman, which Campbell always talks about because he was very influenced by Jiddu-Krishnamurti and Hinduism, that it's all just a cosmic play. It's all just Brahma, the same collective cosmic conscious energy. Well, that's a very different claim than theosis and what traditional Christianity and Orthodoxy is claiming. And so he privileges, as is true with so many Neoplatonists and so many Eastern mystics, is they privilege unity and similarity over multiplicity and differences. That's a huge red flag, because it's essentially half the story. And again, it has no metaphysic to actually root these differences in, which is logos spermatikos. Yes, we all are made in the image of God, whether they're Christian or not. And so it's the logi that is giving rise to Chinese mythology or Hindu mythology or African mythology or Nordic paganism. We believe that there can be seeds of truth in all these different things, but it's not all moving towards the same mountaintop. That is relativism. This is what your average girl on the street would say, with all her tattoos and her logos and our little Buddha statues. It's very naive. And I wish that Campbell lived later into the 20th century and the 21st century, where paradigmatic thinking has actually become much more predominant within philosophy, because his worldview essentially was unchallenged, because at the early 20th century and the mid 20th century, when he was really spouting a lot of this stuff, it goes unchallenged because it was sort of the water in which people swam in. These presuppositions were unchallenged. And so if meaning originates in psychology, which Campbell claims, then we originate meaning. Meaning is not something that's discovered in the world. And in fact, the only thing that Campbell really argued is that religion is just these creations, these mythologies are creations of the human psyche, and that the cultural differences are just minor happenstance, that it's all about this undergirding hero's mythology or the archetypal structures he pulls from Jung. And so we would argue that if meaning originates in psychology, that nullifies objective meaning itself, because everyone can actually form different understandings or go through evolutionary processes. There could be tribes that have different collective unconsciousness. So logos precedes human consciousness from the Orthodox perspective, and this is a huge delineation. Or logos precedes human consciousness. It's not human consciousness that's bringing forth these archetypes. It's the logos itself. And so we are discovering archetypes through Christ. And Christ is the ultimate fulfillment of all hero myths. Every culture has a hero myth because Christ is actually real. The logos is actually real. And number 4, Campbell cannot account for evil. So he's talking about in the hero's myth, as you saw in this video, it's talking about how, the hero goes to the underworld and then he defeats evil. Okay, well, what's evil then, Mr. Campbell? What is it? How does it exist? Well, he doesn't have an explanation because of his Advaita Vedantaism, his Eastern mysticism. It's non-dualistic. And so evil essentially collapses into a psychological imbalance. And this is true for Carl Jung and Jungian psychology itself. It's one of the weakest points and aspects of Jungian psychology, is that in reality, it has no explanation for evil. It has no theodicy, as you would use in religious studies. So from that perspective, there's no real spiritual warfare. He waxes poetically about spirituality and New Age this and New Age that, but there's no spiritual warfare. As he tells you, just follow your bliss, and doors were open where there's previously walls. Well, people's bliss is very different. And there's pedos get bliss when they diddle kids. And because of his relativistic epistemology, he can't even make objective moral claims as well. So when you're talking about telling everyone to follow your bliss and follow your happiness, well, people's happiness is fulfilled in a lot of different ways. And how can you argue then, due to your relativism, that one form of bliss is better than the other? You can't. Epistemologically, you can't. And ethically and morally, you can't. So the hero's journey cannot explain genuine evil. In history, it must just be explained as a sort of psychological imbalance, despite anybody who studies history seriously will see there are real injustices. There is real evil. And if you're attuned spiritually, you'll know that you are being acted upon. This is the whole theology of the logisme, that the imagination of man is not inside space and time, and that the evil one himself is probing and pricking us with temptations and mental images. This is the battlefield of spiritual warfare. But they don't have any explanation of this because it's just imbalances, right? Because man creates God in this system. And so number 5, Campbell collapses theology into anthropology. By psychologizing religion, it collapses theology into general anthropology. God is only a projection, a la Freud. This is a Freudian concept, and Freud really put that forth, and that's where Campbell is pulling that from. All religion is just psychological projection onto the world. And you can find this in Feuerbach, Freud, Jung, Campbell, and many spiritual teachers nowadays. There is no imago Dei. There is no unique, divine, transcendent aspect of man in the system. You are only psychology. You are repressed archetypes, and people are acting out these archetypes only because they're part of this collective unconscious. And so man creates and explains God however he wishes in this system. We understand man because we first know God. That's how orthodoxy works. That's a coherent worldview. Revelation is real. He denies revelation in favor for mythology. He thinks mythology is a form of revelation. But who's revealing the mythology? Again, the collective unconscious. So anthropology actually depends on theology, because to know what man is to first and foremost understand correct theology. That is a huge delineation and distinction that most people fail to recognize. And number 6, the 6th reason from an Orthodox perspective why the hero, the hero's journey and Campbell's entire mythological framework is fallacious and falls apart is because where do the archetypes come from? They can't explain them. Jung claims inherited psychic structures, as I've already said, but that only renames the phenomenon. Archetypes are the eternal logi of creation. That gives it a metaphysical origin. That gives it a structure which can be continued. Campbell essentially observes the shadows in the Platonic cave. He's looking at these patterns in mythology and world history and world religion. But where does the light come from? Because if you're seeing the patterns, where's the source of the pattern? It can't just be man's subconscious, because it's just an infinite loop. And so in orthodoxy, these reflections are real. The patterns, the archetypes across myths, this is all real and it's powerful. The difference is, where is the source of light that is giving forth these shadows that we all see? And that is Logos Spermaticos. That is St. Justin Martyr talking about how seeds of Logos, a true unified metaphysic that can account for truths in Chinese mythology and Nordic mythology and African mythology and Greek mythology, that these little pieces of seeds are true, but based on what standard? Perennialism has no standard. Orthodoxy and Logos theology provides the standard. So this is why Campbell has good descriptions, but it has no explanatory power. He has an opposite metaphysical direction than orthodoxy. His metaphysical direction is that it's human to mythology. And we argue that it's God to reality to human, then to mythology. And so ontology grounds psychology. The nature of being is how the psychological frameworks exist, but they're expressed in our relationship to God being made in the image of Christ. That's the explanatory reality of it all. Reality itself has the shape of the cross. This is why all these archetypes exist. Why is there all these sacrificial mythologies? Because divine love is sacrificial. Why is there all these hero myths? Because Christ is the ultimate hero. Why are there father archetypes? Because there is a real transcendent Father God. Why is there a mother archetype? Because mothers are real and there's an archetypal teleological standard for them. That's the difference. So Campbell's phenomenology meaning the study of human experience, has merit. These reflections, these patterns have merit. Sacrifice, descent, death, transformation, restoration, but he has no explanation for them. He can't, as I said, he confuses ontology with psychology. He replaces history with mythology. He has no universal access to truth because of his relativism, and he cannot account for evil. He has no theodicy. Campbell collapses theology into anthropology, meaning man is making all this stuff up, and he can't explain where all these archetypes come from, which is his explanatory reason. Well, they're just inherited psychic structures. Where do those come from? Well, the collective unconscious. Where does that come from? Actually, we don't know. So it just comes to a dead end. And so from that perspective, this is why Campbell and these modernist attempts to use the hero's journey in this sort of secular new age spiritual lens falls apart. And this is the hidden religion behind the hero's journey. The hidden religion is one of relativism. It's one of a man-made spirituality. It's one that denies divine revelation. And in fact, it diminishes man's anthropology to essentially an evolutionary creature who encounters or has conscious experiences. And this is the point of life, is self-realization. But he has no objective moral standard to even talk about self-realization. If the entire point is self-realization, why can you then delineate why the pedo shouldn't do what he does, but the person who's an artist should go do what they do? You can't, because in the same religious systems that he appeals to, pedophilia is actually okay. Aspects of a moral transgression that we Christians would find abhorrent are actually okay. Human sacrifice, he's all about human sacrifice is okay. We do not believe that to be the case. And this is why we have to realize when we're talking about the hero's journey, we're talking about Christ. And when we're talking about these patterns, we're talking about the logos, and we're talking about the logi, and we're talking about how these patterns are reflecting Christ. Creation is reflecting Christ. Every mythology that has something true, some transcendent nugget of truth, is rooted back in logos metaphysics. So that's my critique of Joseph Campbell. And I would like to also show you guys why he comes up with all this stuff. How does Joseph Campbell inherit all of this, these intellectual ideas? Where do they come from? Well, I want to walk you through this. So first and foremost, it has to do with analytic psychology. Analytic psychology is just let me see here. Let me go back here. Okay. So analytic psychology is just a fancy term for basically talking about Jungian psychology. And so it has to do with Jung. It was designed to distinguish it from Freud's psychoanalytic theories. And again, if you watch Jordan Peterson talking about the hero's journey, he has so many videos talking about the hero's journey. The problem is it's all rooted in Jungian psychology. This is the explanation for all things. And let me say one thing too. I have it on good authority that we should probably be praying for Jordan Peterson. He is not in good health right now. And hopefully he can go through his own transformation and a return back to the normal world from the darkest place that he is. But from my understanding and people that I know that are close to him, we should pray for him because he health-wise is not doing very well. And we've been asking, so many of us who were moved by him during the Jordan Peterson phenomenon in 16, 17, and 18, he brought so many of us to cross the bridge from Jungian psychology and archetypes and synchronicity to orthodoxy, the truth of it all. The explanatory power of orthodoxy provides the basis for any of this stuff to be true. And hopefully Peterson, if we can pray and hopefully he can offer his heart, he can go on that journey as well. But where the first place all this stuff is coming from is analytic psychology. And then from there, we get to Herder. So I was reading Campbell's book, and the first thing that really came to mind for me is Johann Gottfried Herder has this idea of a folk spirit. And it helped create the idea that peoples and cultures express their inner life through language, song, folklore, myth, all this different stuff. And Campbell picked up on all this. So as I said, this is not unique to Joseph Campbell. This is beginning in the end of the 18th century, right? And so Herder was a German philosopher, theologian, pastor, poet, literary critic, and he's associated with the Age of Enlightenment. He was a romantic philosopher. Now, we'll get into the romantics and what exactly is going on there, but it has to do with this rejection of Enlightenment rationalism, and rightfully so. However, romantics are also doing away with revelation. The romantics, and the German romantics in particular, were incredibly influential to Joseph Campbell. And they are interested in sort of aesthetic, the experience, emotional aesthetics, physical aesthetics, artistic aesthetics. This is what the Romantics were trying to do in an opposition to Enlightenment rationalism, but it's still divorced from any transcendence and ultimate understanding of God. So he was a Romantic philosopher and poet who argued that true German culture was to be discovered among common people. He also stated that it was through folk songs, folk poetry, and folk dances that the true spirit of the nation was popularized. He's credited with establishing and advancing of a number of disciplines: hermeneutics, linguistics, anthropology, and a secular philosophy of history. And so Campbell essentially goes beyond Herder, because Herder still emphasized cultural particularity. That's one of the things that Campbell does not do. He focuses on commonality over all things. At least Johann Herder, back in the 18th and 19th, well, early 19th century, but most of the 18th century, he understood that yes, there may be commonalities that cultures express themselves through this folk spirit, and it's unique to each group of people. And essentially, in Jungian terms, they have their own sort of cultural collective unconscious. But he says these cultures are particular. Campbell uses the same framework, but emphasizes universal sameness. And so from an Orthodox perspective, Campbell moves way too quickly from particularity of these mythologies and these cultures to a universal structure. We can recognize logos and seeds of logos in all nations, but not flatten all religious traditions into essentially a two-dimensional framework where it's all the same thing. Because that can't be, again, you lose objective truth. You lose objective morality once you make that move. Now, the next person that I picked up on reading Campbell was Schelling. Some of you may not be familiar with Schelling, but he was really kind of shadowed by Hegel, unfortunately for him. But he was a German philosopher. Standard histories of philosophy make him the midpoint in the development between German idealism. We've talked before about Kant, and Kant's metaphysical critique of pure reason led to a new movement in philosophy. You basically get 19th century British empiricism. And I actually have a paper on this. I was thinking about editing and publishing, and maybe I'll do that, turn it into a small ebook or something. But Kant is a Copernican revolution in philosophy. That's often how it's framed. And so you get 19th century British empiricism, where science and induction becomes the absolute standard for truth claims, because what Kant does is he then calls into question the knowability of the external world. So then, can you make true universal claims? Truth claims? Well, Kant really says no, but you can make universal moral claims based on his moral imperative. But Schelling is part of this German idealistic movement in which a new methodology in philosophy comes forth. It's called phenomenology. That if we can't know the exterior world, what do we come to know? We know our experience of it, and we're going to study our experience of it. And phenomenology is different from phenomenon. Phenomenology is the study of phenomenon, experiential phenomenon. And so you can situate him essentially between Fichte and Hegel basically overshadows all the German idealists. His one-time university roommate, actually, which is very interesting because they eventually become rivals, and Schelling really never gains any sort of notoriety, especially in the English-speaking world. And I have a whole thing right here. If anybody, again, likes philosophy, I highly recommend you all writing your own notes. So I have this little philosophy book that I go all the way through from Kant to essentially the mid-20th century. And I have all this stuff written down so I can always go back to it. It's a great study guide. And in fact, I have a study guide for today's stream that I can show you guys. That'll be available over at Logos Academy. If anybody is interested, it kind of breaks down all the ideas that I'm presenting in today's stream. But phenomenology is a new metaphysic. It's a metaphysic in which we just study human experience. That metaphysic is where Jung is pulling from, where Freud is pulling from. These psychoanalysts are pulling from this phenomenological German idealism, this new methodology, this new metaphysic. And for Schelling, he has an emphasis on the feeling of nature, right? It's about experience. It's about your emotions and how you feel when you watch a flower or a beautiful tree or a sunset. And for him, nature is a living force, impulsive, creative, bursting out with novelty. And in fact, it's Schelling where Nietzsche pulls his vitalism from. So Nietzsche was not Darwinian. Nietzsche actually was in opposition to Darwin's very reductionistic, materialistic. Well, I mean, Nietzsche's very materialistic, but they root it differently. It's not survival of the fittest. For Nietzsche, it's creativity. It's for him, it's eroticism and violence, and that the flower blossoming or the tree growing against all odds is this vitalistic spirit that undergirds nature. Well, Nietzsche's pulling this from Schelling. That's where he's getting all this stuff. So Schelling is a major influence on Joseph Campbell's work, as I read through A Hero with a Thousand Faces. The next one is Schopenhauer. And Schopenhauer is all about the world as will and representation, or the world as will and idea. And he was one of the first Western philosophers to really incorporate Eastern metaphysics and Eastern mysticism. He was very influenced by his reading of Hinduism, actually. And so it's Schopenhauer, who in the Logos Academy, we actually read one of our meetings. We read Schopenhauer on women, which was kind of based in certain ways. But of course, it's coming from the early 19th century. But Schopenhauer himself was kind of a weird dude, kind of a strange guy. But he characterizes the phenomenal world as a manifestation of a blind, irrational, noumenal will. So there's a will that undergirds reality itself, building on the transcendent idealism of Immanuel Kant. Schopenhauer developed an atheistic, metaphysical, and ethical system that rejected the contemporaneous ideas of German idealism. He's kind of a unique guy within this philosophical lineage. And he was one of the first philosophers in Western tradition to share and affirm significant tenets of Indian philosophy, as I said. So his work has been described as an exemplary manifestation of philosophical pessimism. He was very dark, negative kind of guy. But this idea of will, Schopenhauer, Campbell absorbs a suspicion of ordinary ego consciousness, right? So Schopenhauer pulls this idea of ego and how the ego needs to be transformed from Eastern traditions. And Campbell pulls from this because Campbell was a literary guy. He was not trained in philosophy or intellectual history. He was trained in literary stuff, literature, reading, and he was an obsessive reader. He claims that he read for like 9 hours a day for like 5 years. And this is where he discovered all these patterns. But these are the people he was reading. This is where he's pulling all these ideas from. And so the surface self for Campbell, like Schopenhauer, is not the deepest reality. Myth for Campbell then helps break the ego and awaken one to a deeper ground of being. Very Schopenhauer-esque. But from an Orthodox perspective, Schopenhauer's metaphysics tends towards pessimism and impersonal monism. Again, this Neoplatonic monism, as we already see. Schopenhauer is already in that line of thought, pulling from Indian philosophy. So salvation becomes an escape of willing. Salvation in Schopenhauer's system is an escapism from desire, from vulnerability, from pain and suffering. Orthodoxy teaches the exact opposite, that we have to pick up our cross and follow Christ, which means that suffering is the way in which we actually grow and strengthen ourselves and become something more. And we believe that through suffering, we are actually healed and transfigured into a person in communion with a personal, not an impersonal God, but a personal God who entered history itself. Now, another, as I already mentioned, influence on Campbell is Friedrich Nietzsche. And Nietzsche, again, another strange guy, questioning his own sexuality, gets syphilis in bordellos. And brothels, and he even apparently, according to some historical sources, dabbled with men. But Nietzsche's influence is also important on Campbell because it's the idea of overcoming. This is the whole point of the hero's journey, right? Is overcoming the ordinary self, be transforming into something more. This is Nietzsche's Übermensch. This is the overman. This is the Superman idea. The individual who breaks beyond the conventional morality in creative life. Again, creativity, vitalism is the essence of Nietzsche's world. And if you're going to find positive aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy, it's all about this vitalistic creative spirit, which he believes that the Christian morality reduces and mutes, essentially. So Campbell's hero is not simply obedient. He crosses these boundaries that Nietzsche himself believed that the overman must cross to become something more. He descends, he suffers, he returns for Campbell. But for us, Orthodox, we could say Nietzsche correctly saw that modern moralism during the 19th century was weak and hollow. It was. You can think of the Victorian era. But he replaced humility with self-creation. Not humility, not a descendance of one's will towards an ultimate will, God's will, but a creation of oneself into something new. So in very much, we can look at the transgender phenomenon today as very much Nietzsche-esque, that people are castrating themselves or getting breast implants to overcome who they were to become something greater in their own mind. And you can see that relativistic truth because Nietzsche had no objective truth. Nietzsche was a relativist. And that's why he believed it's about the will to power, which you can find an echo of in Aleister Crowley. So it's again, you can see how this German intellectualism was incredibly influential to Campbell's work and how the philosophy behind the hero's journey is articulated and understood. The hero's journey can become a myth of self-divinization rather than repentance and obedience to God, crucifixion of one's will, to be in similitude to Christ's journey on the cross, crucifixion of our passions, of our temptations, and ultimately a true unification with God. As I said, Freud was greatly influential on Campbell, and Freud, as I said, believed that all religion essentially is a neurotic projection, and he considered God a fantasy based on an infantile need for a dominant father figure. He claimed that during the development of early civilization, God and religion were necessities to help restrain our violent impulses, but in modern times can be discarded in favor of science and reason. And I thought this was interesting, how even though Freud diminishes religion to a neurotic projection, he never gave up his Jewish identity. He says, my parents were Jews. I have remained a Jew myself. Familiarity with Bible stories from an age even before he learned to read had an enduring effect on my direction of my interest. I'm curious what stories they were reading to Freud. But he says, I found that I was expected to feel myself inferior to an alien because I was a Jew. Before his wedding, Freud desired to convert to Protestantism to avoid a Jewish ceremony, but was ultimately persuaded not to. And anyways, you could go on and looking at his articulation of how religion and our concepts of God are essentially rooted in our psychological neurosis. But here is the last quote that I wanted to highlight. Freud describes himself as an author who is ignorant of the language of Holy Writ, who is completely estranged from the religion of his fathers, as well as from every other religion, but who remains, quote, in his essential nature, a Jew who has no desire to alter that nature. Now, I was thinking about doing a stream in the future, which actually highlights how Freud was covering up, again, pedo stuff from his friends. And that's part of where he gets a lot of his psychological neurosis, because he was trying to diminish the calls for help by people who are being molested by some of the important people he was friends with. And so part of his psychology and I have a whole book on this. It's right over there. On how he develops his sort of psychological neurosis in a way to cover up PDF behavior from his friends. Anyways, so you guys get that. His famous book on religion is called Totem and Taboo. Totem, getting back to Durkheim, a friend, the father of sociology, talking about how religion is essentially a sociological phenomenon regarding a symbolic totem, a symbol of some sort. So he's getting into totem and then taboo and seeing a sort of reading into it as sort of repressive neurosis. And then the next one, of course, is actually Adolf Bastian. If you guys have never heard of him, he put forth this idea of elementary ideas and folk ideas. And he was a polymath, remembered best for his contributions to the development of ethnography. Ethnography is when you go and you live with a group of people to study them. And his theory resulted in Carl Jung's development and the theory of archetypes. So even Jung, you notice how none of this is why intellectual history is so important. Even Jung didn't just come up with his archetypes theory. They're always pulling from someone else, right? This is why intellectual history, when you study it, you can see patterns that you wouldn't see previously, that a lot of this stuff is just a continual progression, a natural outflow of previous ideas. But Bastian distinguished between elementary ideas, which he considered were sort of these universal patterns that Campbell's picking up on in human thought, and folk ideas, ideas that are unique to a specific culture. They're culturally specific. They're not universal patterns. And this allows him to say that every culture has its own mythic forms, but beneath them are these universal structures, exactly what Campbell is arguing. This is where he's pulling this stuff from. And so this is close to something that Christianity can partially affirm. There are universal structures. We've already talked about them, the logi, the divine principles of creation. And there is a universal standard. And we can find, that's logos theology, and we can find pieces of it in different religions and mythology, logos spermatikos. But orthodoxy would ground these universals not in autonomous human psychology, as we already see going in the late 18th and early 19th century, late 19th and early 20th century. So it's the logi of creation. Universality is not merely a psychic phenomenon. It's a metaphysical and ontological phenomenon. And he's influenced, we already had analytic. He's also influenced by the father, or one of the considered fathers of comparative mythology, and that's James George Frazer. And I actually have his book. It's a famous book. It's called The Golden Bough. I don't know if any of you guys have ever read it. It's a massive tome. And I used this when I did a capstone thesis project on theories of magic, because whether it be Malinowski, Taylor, Frazer, all these different founding fathers, Durkheim, these founding fathers of what we would consider religious studies, which is what my PhD is. Religious studies is coming out of this milieu of comparative mythology and comparative religion. And they argued regarding magic, that magic was some sort of superstitious, irrational understanding of causation. This was kind of the general consensus. And that religion becomes a sort of crystallized form of that superstition. And then science was the rational doing away with both magic and religion. Well, it's Frazer that puts forth the ideas of like sympathetic connections, the law of correspondences, that things can have connections at a distance. Now, this is the birth of what we'd call armchair theologians or armchair philosophers, scholars, people like Max Muller, who was literally the leading scholar of Hinduism and Indian religion, never went to India. He was in England. He was in London the whole time. And during the early 20th century and the late 19th century, these guys were just reading text. It was all textual, very much like Campbell, and then comparing text, focusing on similarities and finding their connections. And so even here, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but you could find in the Killing God section, he's making the argument that Mithraism is basically just another pattern of Christianity. And this is why Christians found Mithraic religions and cults so dangerous, because they were essentially showing that Christianity wasn't unique. Well, to think that you have to have such a reduced and naive philosophical understanding of the theological doctrines and the paradigm to even argue that Mithraism, which was doing human sacrifice, which was doing inebriating rituals, in my argumentation for the Amanita muscaria cult in the history of psychedelic substances, that these things are actually, I argue, for example, Soma. Soma was one of the Vedic gods. You had Agni and Soma and a whole plethora of these Vedic Indo-European gods in the Vedic text. Really what gives rise to Hinduism. And that Soma was this inebriating god. You would drink Soma, you would become you would reach this point of ecstasy, and you become infatuated, and Soma would give you ideas. Well, a lot of scholars have speculated that this had to do with psychedelic substances. And Soma, I believe, was part of a Mithraic tradition, because Mithra is actually mentioned in the Vedic text. Most people don't realize that. He actually originates in Vedic religion. Now, he gets all these devotional cults and what we would consider now Iran, but Persia historically, and also Armenia. So I did my own research on this, and I believe that Soma, this Mithraic cult, incorporates this lost inebriating beverage that essentially goes away, because after centuries, only the priest, the Brahmins, can engage in the ritual inebriation with Soma, that it gets transmigrated over to Armenia. And I have historical evidence in a paper, maybe I'll publish at some point, that they were selling and giving massive amounts of these Amanita muscaria and these mushrooms, including psilocybin mushrooms, to some of the Persians' elite for their Mithraic rituals. So how can you take a sober, non-ecstatic, non-inebriating tradition like Christianity and equate that specifically with something like Mithraism? You have to be incredibly naive. And I'm not to say these guys weren't incredibly learned. I mean, they had multiple languages under their belts. They read tons of stuff. But in regards to what I'm presenting today, a sort of paradigmatic, a philosophical, presuppositional analysis of this stuff, it wasn't there yet. They weren't thinking in those ways. It really isn't until the collapse of logical positivism that philosophy begins to think in terms of paradigms. So Fraser, as one of the leading founders, if you will, of comparative religion and religious studies, was incredibly influential on Campbell. And he inherits this comparative mindset where you basically just lay religious texts down on the ground, and then you read them and you find the similarities and you compare and contrast. And he reads cross-culturally these same patterns. But again, I'm not saying the patterns don't exist. I'm saying that why do the patterns exist? It's not through Jungian analytic psychology. It's due to the logia. It's metaphysical and ontological. It's not psychological. And so we would argue as Orthodox Christians that comparison can be useful, but it can also become incredibly reductionistic. And I would argue that's part of the problem with even my field of religious studies. It becomes incredibly reductionistic. And so similarities do not equate to sameness. It does not prove sameness. Just because things can be similar does not mean they're equally the same. A pagan dying and rising or in a vegetation myth is not the same thing as the historical resurrection of Christ. This gets back to the Eleusinian mysteries and Persephone going to Hades and the underworld and then returning. Just because there may be some similarities is not the same thing as the historical resurrection of Christ, our Lord and Savior. But Campbell treats analogy as identity. Orthodoxy can say, yes, these myths are shadows, as I said, using the Platonic myth of the cave, but the shadow is not the thing in itself. And that's the problem with all these guys, is they think that the shadow is the thing, that they've rationally articulated what religion is or what Christianity is. The next influence on Campbell is obviously Advaita Vedanta. I've already mentioned this. And Advaita Vedanta is a non-dualistic school of thought in Hinduism. And it's especially found in more of the philosophical texts of Hinduism, known as the Upanishads. It's probably the more philosophical texts of, the Bhagavad Gita is not really philosophical. It's about dharma. It's about your duty. And so for them, the Atman, the soul, the self, and Advaita Vedanta, it's non-dualistic. So it's the same thing as God. Your soul is basically the same thing as Brahman. Okay? And this is where Campbell is pulling this idea that you have your own little piece of Christ, that you have your own Buddha nature, that you are divine. You just have to go through your hero's journey to actualize your divinity. He's pulling that concept from this school of Hindu thought, the Advaita Vedanta non-dualistic tradition. And this essentially shapes Campbell's understanding of all religion, because he's collapsing it all into this monistic framework. He often interprets myth as helping the individual break through the illusion. Well, that's funny because Advaita Vedanta says all reality is illusion. It's called Maya in Sanskrit. That the physical appearance of the world isn't the thing in of itself. And you can feel a piece of that in Kant, in what happens within the German idealists in the school of phenomenology, and the German romantics are trying to deal with the idea of that being the case. It's very Eastern. So you can see the sources that Campbell is pulling from all have these sort of shared commonalities. And this is why Campbell absolutely rejects exclusivist religious claims. And in many ways, this non-dualism undergirds all modern spirituality in the West. And even, it's funny that to even hear Protestants, when we do apologetics against Protestantism, that they are so reluctant to hear that Orthodoxy has exclusivistic claims. Why? That's literally the gospel. And so this idea of non-duality and the lack of exclusivity is rooted in a lot of this historical thought. It's very Eastern mystical. And Campbell picks up on this exactly. And so Advaita offers the little metaphysical depth that Campbell actually has to his worldview. But from an Orthodox perspective, it collapses all personhood, all distinction, all truth into a non-identity of monism. It subsumes all of this into a non-duality. Christianity does not teach that the soul is identical to God. It's a totally different paradigm. And God by nature is in a different ontological category than we as created creatures. We make that delineation that Eastern mysticism does not. And so Orthodoxy, we preserve communion, personhood, love, a willful love, not a forced love. Love can't be forced. This is why God allows us to sin, because he wants us to love him, and we can only do that through a willful desire to do so. And we believe in distinction. Orthodoxy is not going to fall into this monistic, non-dualistic world that Campbell has put forth. And so this is really the undergirding metaphysic of Campbell, is that it's non-dual metaphysics coming from Eastern mysticism, and they root all these archetypes back into Jungian psychology. Now, Campbell, I will give him credit. Campbell has one of the best skeleton keys of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. If any of you guys have actually seen or read Finnegan's Wake, it's really an incredible book. And in Finnegan's Wake, he has so many references to different ideas and historical instances that you really need Joseph Campbell's skeleton key. I will give him credit. I think he has probably the best book to, if you read them side by side. So you would have James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, and Joseph Campbell's skeleton key to Finnegan's Wake. And it provides page by page an explanation of what's happening. Now, James Joyce is really part of the modernist movement. And I don't mean modernism. I don't mean modernity. I mean modernist movement in regards to art. And so This has to do with literature, visual arts, performing arts, music, and emphasize experimentation, abstraction, subjective experience. When we're talking about modernity, we're talking about rationalism, individualism, democracy, technological progress. I'm blanking on the fifth right now. Rationalism, scientism. That is modernity. Now, we're not talking about modernity. We're talking about the artistic modernist movement, which is about avant-gardism. And this is why Picasso is actually a great influence to Campbell. So James Joyce, an Irish author, he writes this book, Ulysses, if you guys have ever read it. And what he's doing is very much Campbell-esque, because Campbell is talking about these universal patterns, right? Well, what Joyce does in his book Ulysses is take the pattern or the archetypal framework of Odysseus and the Odyssey, and turning that into and recapitulating that into the life of someone living in modern day Dublin at the time, and showing how the pattern, the mythological framework of the Odyssey is actually present in everybody's life. So that is part of, again, a major influence on Campbell. And he took from modernism the idea that myth is not dead. Even in secular modernity, mythic patterns remain active. Now, he replaces these mythic patterns, he replaces God with these mythic patterns. For Campbell, that is the highest end-all be-all, is these mythic patterns. And we critique modernism as an artistic movement by recognizing that the death of inherited sacred order, this is what modernism recognizes as the death of inherited sacred order. We would say, yeah, modernity has killed sacred order, but they replace it with artistic construction. And orthodoxy would say that the artist cannot become the priest of a self-created mythology. It basically does away with the role of any sort of priest of creation. Art can reveal truth, absolutely. Mythology can reveal truth, but only when it participates in the eternal logos of Christ, rather than inventing private symbolic worlds, as they argue. Now, obviously, he's perennialistic. He's influenced by theosophy and Blavatsky and all that different stuff. This is the skeleton key to Finnegan's Wake. I would say my favorite of Campbell's work, not saying that this doesn't have interesting importance, but I'm laying out my critique of all this stuff. And of course, Campbell was also influenced by Judo Krishnamurti. He encountered him, and he claims that this guy right here, who the theosophist, if you remember, we talked about George Ledbetter, and I did a whole thing on Blavatsky's theosophy and how they saw Judo Krishnamurti as the Maitreya, the world savior. And he ends up having a bunch of seizures. Once he gets a little bit older, he's brought to America, and he's going to unite all the world religions under one, essentially, Messiah. And this is what the theosophist thought this guy was. He ends up rejecting theosophy and the world teacher status that he was supposed to be, but still promoted, again, this relativistic perennialism and general New Age spirituality. It's one of the reasons why he's so influential. And you can see, even in his last days, he says, a few days before his death, he stated that nobody had understood what spirit or intelligence had passed through his body, and that after his death, no such body or intelligence would be found. For many hundred years, his supporters working through the nonprofit foundations in India, Britain, and the United States oversee several independent schools based on his educational philosophy. And Campbell met Krishnamurti and claims that he deepened Campbell's interest in Indian philosophy. And this is where he turns to Advaita Vedantism and all these different Eastern traditions. And this is where the famous masks come from. Again, the hero with 1,000 masks. Where is he getting this idea of masks from? Well, he's pulling it from here. Religions are masks of God. The forms differ, but the mystery behind them is all the same. Well, that's funny because they have exclusionary contradictory and exclusionary claims. So the Orthodox critique from all this stuff is essentially that there is indeed one truth, but it's a who, not a what. It's Jesus Christ. It's not an abstract, universal, perennial truth. It's Jesus Christ, the eternal logos. And we can recognize partial truths, as I said, logos spermaticos, outside our faith. But there must be one epistemic standard. And that's the thing that this entire worldview of Campbell and his proponents don't have. So, anyways, that's going to do it on the little historical journey that I wanted to provide you guys with. But let me catch up with the chat here real quick. Let me see. Logan 7122 says, first time actually catching a live stream, regular Spotify listener. Oh, thank you very much, brother, for stopping in. Appreciate that. Justin Henley throws in 5, says St. Justin Martyr mentioned I pay tithe. Well, thank you very much, brother. Do appreciate that. And Logan throws in another 5, no comment. Appreciate you, brother. Austin DeTulio's in the chat. He says, in the gym right now on my hero's journey. There you go. There you go. He is descending into the underworld as we speak to be transformed, acquiring new skills to battle evil. And Logan throws in another 5, 3 more times, no comment. Thank you very much, brother, for that support. I do appreciate it. And let me see. I think that is all of them. All right. Do you guys want to watch? Let's watch just a little bit. I don't want to watch the whole video because it can be a little long. But we'll watch a little bit of Jordan Peterson talking about the hero's journey from, again, his Jungian perspective. And everything I just laid out, you'll begin to see. It reduces everything to a sort of psychological analysis. But I want to remind everyone that today's stream is sponsored by Logo Cinema. They want to provide media. They want to provide a new framework for presenting the hero's journey through Logos theology, through this understanding the true hero, which is Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. And if you would like to sign up, which I highly encourage everyone to, use this link right here. Logo Cinema, as I showed you guys, is a platform not only creating, but hosting tons of great Orthodox content. And you can find all my streams up on Logo Cinema. So all my live streams will be available over on Logo Cinema for anyone who's interested. So do check that out. And please join. We'd greatly appreciate you helping our brothers out. Oh, and Logo Cinema just sent in $20. Says, thanks for the stream, DPH. Touched on so many things that are core to the ethos of what we want to do with storytelling in the culture. Looking forward to working with you more on some exciting projects. Glory to God. Well, thank you very much, brother. Glory to God. And thank you for the support in sponsoring today's stream. And anybody who would like to sponsor a stream, if you have a topic you would like for me to dive into, you can do so with this link right here. And I will email you back and you can clarify what it is, the topic that you would like for me to discuss. And also, don't forget, if you want to get access to the study guide, so let me show you guys that real quick. So right here, where did it go? Oh, there it is. Here's my little study guide. So much of what I talked about, all that intellectual history, this breaks down Joseph Campbell's basic ideas, the intellectual foundations of his thought. Again, German Romanticism, getting into Fraser, comparative religion, Freud, Jung, Hinduism, Buddhism, Nietzsche, and William James. William James was one that I didn't even mention in my intellectual breakdown. And if you're familiar with William James, the great American pragmatist, you'll know that he has a definition of religion that focuses just on religious experience. So his famous definition of religion. I'll read it to you real quick. It's just a sentence. William James, one of the only American philosophers that's actually widely read in Europe, if you weren't aware. He says, religion, therefore, and this is him taking nitric oxide. So he comes to this experience by basically getting high on nitric oxide and says, therefore, as I now ask you arbitrarily to take it, shall mean for us the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. So what does he do? He reduces religion to a phenomenological definition, arguing that religion is whatever you decide is ultimate importance in your unique experiences, your mystical encounters. And so he does nothing to do with doctrine, theology, paradigms, ritual. He claimed, based on his nitric oxide experiences, that religion essentially just his experience, whatever you consider to be divine. And he, remember, I think it was an ashtray where he's getting high on nitric oxide and he saw God in an ashtray, something to that effect. So William James, interesting guy, historically important, but also a great influence to Campbell. Again, all this stuff is presented in the study guide, the 12 steps to the hero's journey. And then I have Plato's, again, cave right here, and Campbell understanding of Jesus Christ, showing that he just believed him to be a symbolic pattern. He didn't really care about his historicity, and reduces him to psychology. And then I have some of my critiques of Campbell's as well. So if you want access to all of that, just go over to the Logos Academy, join, and that will be up in the playlist. Dove Omega throws in 5, says, I can add a little to the goal, but now I must pick up my cross and bear my burdens over at the grocery store. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Well, thank you very much, brother. I do appreciate the support. Okay, so let's listen to Jordan Peterson talk a little bit about the hero's journey and Carl Jung's psychoanalysis.
Here's another. And he gets free of the list. Here's another something worth considering. And I don't know how important it is, but it might be really important. It depends on how important. This is something that Carl Jung said, so it depends on how important Jung is. Now, Freud established the field of psychoanalysis, and with it, investigation, I would say, rigorous investigation into the contents of the unconscious. A modern psychologists and psychiatrists like to, what would you say, denigrate Freud. But and I think there's a reason for that. I think that Freud's fundamental insights were so profound and so valuable that they got immediately absorbed into our culture, and now they seem self-evident, and so that all that's left of Freud is his errors. You know, because we believe everything else. We believe all the profound things he discovered. We just take them for granted, and so we don't believe the things that he said that weren't quite on the money, and that's all we credit him with now. But he was certainly the first person who brought up the idea of the unconscious in a rigorous manner, and he was the first person to do a rigorous examination of dreams, because the Interpretation of Dreams is a great book. It's well worth reading. And he was the first person to note that people were, in some sense, inhabited by sub-personalities that had a certain degree of autonomy and independent life. Brilliant observation. The cognitive psychologists haven't caught up with that at all yet.
Again, I just want to remind everybody that you should pray for Jordan Peterson. Again, I have it on good authority that he is not doing very well right now. And by the way, we have 1 minute left to reach the goal. So if you appreciate these streams, you appreciate my work, please send in a question or comment or show some love with a super chat. You can do so with Dono Chat or Streamlabs. As I said before, Streamlabs is now working so I can present all those super chats on screen. But if you appreciate the work that I put in my streams, please support. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it.
Jung was profoundly affected by Freud. Jung was profoundly affected by Nietzsche and by Freud. Those were his two main intellectual influences. I don't think one more than the other. He split with Freud on the religious issue. That was what caused the disruption in their relationship. And I think it's an extremely interesting historical occurrence. It might be of profound significance.
Thank you very much to Thee We Sing, sends in $10. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate that. We have, it looks like it just expired. Dang, our super chat goal. But major thank you for everyone who has supported. Major thank you to Blink 444. To Thee We Sing says, here's 2 gallons of gas on me. Well, thank you very much for the gallons of gas. I do appreciate that. And Blink 444 throws in 5, says Ulysses is much better than the Nolan Skittles. Oh, yeah. Do that creative interpretation of the Odyssey instead. Yeah, that would have been a much better work. Much better. Thank you very much to Thee We Sing and Blink 444.
Freud believed that the fundamental myth of the human being was the Oedipal myth. And the Oedipal myth, from a broader perspective, is a failed hero story. So the Oedipal myth is the myth of a man who develops, who grows up, but then accidentally becomes too close to his mother, sleeps with her. He doesn't know who she is, and as a consequence, blinds himself. And there's a warning about human development gone wrong in that story. And I think that Freud put his finger on it extraordinarily well, because human beings have a very long period of dependency. And one of the things that you do see in clinical practice is that many people's problems are associated with their inability to break free of their family. Like they're consumed by the family drama, right? They can't get beyond what happened to them in their family. They're stuck in the past. That's equivalent, symbolically speaking, you might say, to the idea of being too close to your mother, of the boundaries being improperly specified. And that happens far more often than anyone would like to think. As I said, Freud thought it was a universal. But Jung, see, he had a different idea, and his idea was that it wasn't the failed hero story that was the universal human myth. It was the successful hero story. And that's a big difference. Like, it's seriously a big difference, because the successful hero story is, remember in Sleeping Beauty, you may remember this in the Disney movie, the evil queen traps the prince in a dungeon, and she's not going to let him out till he's old, right? And so there's this comical scene where she's down in the dungeon, he's all in chains, and she's laughing at him, telling him what his future is going to be like. She's quite evil. And you know, she paints this wonderful picture of him being freed in like 80 years and hobbling out of the castle on his horse that's so old he can barely stand up, and him with gray hair. And you know, and she recites this story of his eventual triumphant departure from the castle as a...
JRip45 says, what does it say about having dreams of painting your grandmother's pubic hairs, Peters? I would say Freud was right about you, JRip. If you're dreaming about that, that might be some sexual repression, my man. That's hilarious.
Old and decrepit man, and she has a great laugh about it. And it's nice, you know, it's a real punchy story. It's really something wonderful for children, that story. And he gets free of the shackles. And the things that free him are 3 little female fairies. So it's the positive aspect.
Wait, I remember going over the maps of meaning. I must have missed that part. He talks a lot about Babylonian mythology and all that different stuff. Gilgamesh. No, I don't know that passage from Peter. I have the maps of meaning, by the way, over here. Right here is the maps of meaning. Somebody find me the page. What? Somehow I missed that. Let me find out pubic hair in the index. What? J-Rip, you should find. Yeah, let's do this. This is crazy. Okay. Maps of meaning page. Dreams of grandma's pubic hair. What? $164. Okay, let me open up the 164. Okay. I'm going to read you this whole section. It says, I dreamed I saw my maternal grandmother sitting on the bank of a swimming pool, which was also a river. In real life, she had been a victim of Alzheimer's disease and had regressed to a semi-conscious state. In the dream as well, she had lost her capacity for self-control. Her genital region was exposed dimly. It had the appearance of a thick mat of hair. She was stroking herself absent-mindedly. She walked over to me with a handful of pubic hair compacted into something resembling a large artist's paintbrush. She pushed this at my face. I raised my arm several times to deflect her hand. Finally, unwilling to hurt her or interfere with her any further, I let her have her way. She stroked my face with the brush gently and said like a child, "Isn't it soft?" From I looked at her ruined face and said, "Yes, Grandma, it's soft." Out from behind her stepped an old white bear. It stood to her right, to my left. We were all beside the pool. The bear was old, like little dogs get old. I could see very well, seemed miserable, and behaved unpredictably. It started to growl and wave its head at me, just like little mean dogs growl. And look, just before they bite you, or grab my left hand in its jaws, we both fell into the pool, which was by this time more like a river. I was pushing the bear away with my free hand. I yelled, "Dad, what should I do?" I took an axe and hit the bear behind the head hard a number of times, killing it. It went limp in the water. I tried to lift its body onto the bank. Some people came to help me. I yelled, "I have to do this alone." Finally, I forced it out of the water. I walked away down the bank. My father joined me and put his arm around my shoulder. I felt exhausted but satisfied. I don't even know what to say to that. I don't even know what to say to that. What? Blink 444 says, whoever chatted that sounds like PNV to me. Wow. Okay. Okay. Somehow I did not highlight that section when I took all my notes. I was focused more on religion, apparently. When was that written? Well, Maps of Meaning is like his big book. I would say, I'll tell you the publishing date. Maps of Meaning was published in 1999. So right at the turn of the 21st century, 1999 was when he published Maps of Meaning. Wicked Wally says, this connects to Tyler Robinson somehow, doesn't it? Yeah, well, that's what Tyler Robinson faced. That's why he confessed to his family. His grandma painted a brush of pubic hair on his face. Wow. Okay, I did not remember that.
the feminine that frees him from the dungeon. So it's very interesting and very accurate from a psychological perspective. It's the negative element of the feminine that encapsulates him in the dungeon, and it's the positive element of the feminine that frees him. And then he has the queen, the evil queen, is not very happy when he escapes. You may remember this. She stands on top of her castle tower and starts to spin off cosmic sparks. I mean, she's quite the creature, enveloped in flame, and then she turns into a dragon. And then the prince has to fight with her in order to make contact with Sleeping Beauty and awaken her from her comatose existence, as her unconscious existence. And it's a brilliant representation of a successful hero myth. He doesn't end up staying in an unholy relationship with his mother, let's say. He escapes and then conquers the worst thing that can be imagined and is ennobled by that. And that, as a consequence, he's able to wake the slumbering feminine from its coma. And that's a Jungian story.
See, it's getting back to Jungian understanding of the anima and the animus, the feminine and the masculine, and how, again, you see from the German Romantics, from German idealism to Advaita Vedanta spirituality, the synthesis of opposites. And Jung believed that we have to bring these feminine and masculine qualities together to be a whole actualized individual. That's exactly what Peterson's putting forth, what I was criticizing earlier.
And that's the story that he juxtaposed against Freud. See, Freud thought of religious phenomena as part of an occult tide that would drown rationality. That's why Freud was so vehemently anti-religious. And Jung thought, no, it's not the case. You're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's something profound and central to the hero myth. And Jungian clinical work is essentially the awakening of the hero myth in the analyzand, in the client or in the patient, to conceptualize yourself as that which can confront chaos and triumph, and that's associated with an ennobling of consciousness and the establishment of proper positive relationships between male and female.
So based on chat requests, I will hit you guys with this real quick.
I dreamed I saw my maternal grandmother sitting by the bank of a swimming pool. That was also a river. In real life, she had been a victim of Alzheimer's disease and had regressed before her death to a semi-conscious state. In the dream as well, she had lost her capacity for self-control. Her genital region was exposed dimly. It had the appearance of a thick mat of hair. She was stroking herself. Oh! Absent-mindedly, she walked over to me with a handful of pubic hair, compacted into something resembling a large artist's brush. She pushed this at my face. I raised my arm several times to deflect her hand, finally unwilling to hurt her or interfere with her any further. I let her have her way. She stroked my face with the brush of pubes gently and said, like a child, "Is this soft, Geordie? Is it soft?" I looked at her with a ruined face and says, "Yes, Grandmama. Yes, it's soft."
I had never seen that. Wow. Okay. I think that does it. That's enough Jordan Peterson for me today. So anyways, that puts us over the 2-hour mark. I just want to thank everyone who supported the stream today, and just want to remind everyone to go sign up to Logo Cinema. The link to join Logo Cinema, again, all my work will be over there. I'm going to be working with new projects with them. Use the link in the video description. I will also share that with you guys right here. And again, get access to all of their great content, all the Orthodox documentaries. If you haven't seen Sacred Alaska, American Orthodoxy, Between Heaven and Earth, all these great films. Saint Tikhon of Zadenstock, great stuff. So major thank you again to Logo Cinema for sponsoring today's stream. And as I said, the hero's journey and the philosophy behind Campbell, Jung, Freud, even Peterson, Feuerbach. It is all the idea that somehow we create God, we project God onto the world. There is a relativistic epistemology. They put psychology before ontology. And ultimately, there's no cohesion there. It doesn't make sense. So anyways, that's going to do it for me, guys. Go sign up to Logos to Cinema, and major shout out to all of them. Let me just double check, make sure I don't miss anybody before hopping off here. Nothing on Dono Chat. All right. I'm going to be back tomorrow, either covering I don't know if you guys saw, but the Iran war is back on. So I saw some of the Gulf nations attacked Iran today. The U.S. attacked Iran for the last 2 days. But I also want to do a stream covering the recent death of Connor Murphy. So I want to do a stream just on the sad story of Connor Murphy, famous fitness influencer on YouTube in 2020. I tried to do a stream on him in which he took down on my YouTube channel. He gave me a copyright strike for playing a video of his in which we were looking at his psychosis due to taking ayahuasca for like months every single day. Basically had a psychotic break. And just recently, he ended up dying by drowning in Thailand. And upon his death, just the day before the last few social media posts, it looked like he was also high on psychedelics. And he was mocking the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost. So I was going to do a stream kind of breaking down the journey of Connor Murphy. I thought that'd be a worthwhile. Yeah, he was only 32 years old. 32 years old, had a YouTube channel over 2 million, had money, left the United States to live in Thailand. In fact, a few years ago, his Thai girlfriend claimed that he beat her with a golf club. I don't know. But we're going to dive into the sad story of Connor Murphy, a man that had so much going for him and ended up, slow boy. It was one of his last social media posts. He was dressed up like an elf shooting a rubber bow and arrow around his house. And I'll find the details about it, but essentially mocked the Holy Ghost. It was one of his last social media posts. So I also want to do one diving into the Orthodox prophecies on Erdogan. So we got a bunch of content coming out for the next few days, but a major thank you to all of you guys who supported the stream today. Yeah, J-Rip says, blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is the one thing you cannot do. And let that be a lesson to us all. Apparently, it was the night before he died. Night before he drowned, he went into some sort of psychosis. According to the girlfriend he was with, he started he was spreading paint all over the inside of his rental house. He got into it with a security guard. And when they tried to prevent him from leaving, he ran away and jumped into a lake. And from what we understand, I was waiting for the toxicology to do a stream on it because I'm sure he had substances in his body. But he ended up drowning, and people think that he was potentially high on drugs and just kept swimming until exhaustion. So, So Lord have mercy on Connor Murphy's soul. He was clearly in a very, very dark place. He was, in my humble opinion, I think that he was dealing with some sort of possession, especially when you watch the last few social media posts. One of them, and he became like a looks maxer. He was actually the idol of clavicular. Did you guys know that? Connor Murphy was like one of the idols of clavicular. And Connor Murphy was getting into some of the looks maxing stuff towards the end of his, sadly, his short life. And in one of the videos I saw, he was making fun of Luxmaxer's light clavicular, which ironically was his hero for like bone smashing, and he was dressed up like the devil. So sad story. But I'm going to kind of do a video overview of his life and be a warning to us all. So I'll be doing that tomorrow. And I plan on doing at least 3 streams in the next 4 or 5 days. So we got tons of unique, cool content coming out. So smash that like. And major thank you to everyone who supported today. Major thank you to Logo Cinema. Go support our brothers at Logo Cinema. And I'll see you guys in the next one. As always, until then, God bless.